Magnitogorsk, summer of 1989. Young Ira Sorokina was returning home in tears. She had waited in a long line for the scarce sneakers, already imagining how she would show off her fashionable new shoes to her friends, but the stock ran out right before her turn. The girl entered the elevator to go up to her apartment, when suddenly a man's hand stopped the closing door. A tall man stood next to her. Irina was too absorbed in her thoughts and didn't even look in his direction. Suddenly, the stranger grabbed the girl, tried to hug and touch her, but she began to resist desperately. Then cold, hard fingers closed around the girl's neck. A threatening voice hissed, "Just try to scream!" And the hands squeezed her throat tighter and tighter until Ira lost consciousness. The attacker dragged the girl out of the elevator on the top floor and pulled her onto the roof. There, he started to undress her, but she regained consciousness and began to struggle and scream. Then the criminal pulled out a knife. One stab, another, a third. The villain wounded the victim and fled. Bleeding, the girl staggered away with her last strength. She managed to make it to her apartment. When she got home, her mother noticed that the girl was wiping blood from her neck, but the red stains kept appearing again and again. "Daughter, what happened to you?" "Everything's fine, Mom, don't worry," said Irina and collapsed unconscious. The ambulance arrived quickly and the doctors managed to provide timely assistance to the victim. The villain inflicted 3 serious wounds on her, to the neck, chest and lower back. The girl was brought back from the brink of death. When Ira regained consciousness in the hospital, a young investigator came to see her. Nina Plotnikova managed to talk to the victim woman to woman. Soviet society was more conservative than it is today, especially in small towns in remote regions. Rape could be a great shame for a girl, and it was embarrassing to talk about harassment. Plotnikovoi managed to gain the victim's trust, but there was no valuable information in her testimony. Irina didn't get a good look at the criminal. She could only say that he was a tall young man. The only thing she clearly remembered was the hard, cold fingers gripping her neck. That memory made her wake up screaming at night for many years.
She was discharged, but she was terrified, in horror, afraid of everything, even afraid to sleep, thinking that something would crawl out from under the bed.
The criminal left no evidence. None of the neighbors saw or heard anything. The investigation reached a dead end. But just a month later, Magnitogorsk was shaken by an even more terrible crime. On July 31st, 1989. Nadezhda Terenchuk returned from work and saw that the neighbors were gathered at the entrance. When they saw her, everyone fell silent and looked away. The woman immediately felt that something terrible had happened. People in uniform approached her and said that a crime had occurred and she needed to identify the victim. A shiver from horror. Nadezhda went up to the top floor and saw her daughter Zhana, who was 16, lying dead on the stair landing.
And for some reason, I suddenly felt really bad, in a way that was unusual. Maybe it was a premonition or something. Everyone had already arrived. The residents, aware it was my daughter, said, "Come, a girl was found there."
The girl moved into this house with her parents quite recently. She hadn't had time to really get to know the neighbors yet, and she could have easily entered the building with an unfamiliar man without suspecting anything was wrong. Very little could be found out about Zhana's death. The girl was attacked in the elevator. The criminal cut off her air supply, dragged her out onto the stair landing of the top floor, undressed her and carefully placed her sundress next to her. Then he simply left. The results of the examination showed that there was no assault. Maybe the criminal was scared off, but none of the neighbors heard or saw anything, and most of the residents were at work at that time. And if the villain simply dumped the body, then the motive becomes unclear. Such an attack in broad daylight was a very high-profile incident at that time. The detectives worked tirelessly. The criminal left no traces or witnesses, so the investigators began questioning everyone who had been noticed in attacks on girls, harassment and other similar crimes. They questioned about 1,500 people, and one of them, Sergei Topchev, suddenly confessed. It was me who took Jana's life. I did it. The man was immediately sent to the detention center. In his confession, he wrote, I was riding with Jana in the elevator, accidentally bumped into her, and she rudely insulted me. I couldn't hold myself back and attacked the girl, cutting off her air supply. Although I had no intention of taking her life, but the investigation quickly showed that he didn't know the details of the crime. The detectives realized that Topcheyev couldn't have committed what he confessed to. We
didn't take the easy way. Hooray, hooray, we already have a confession. Because when we start breaking down the situation, he doesn't know the small details.
It turned out that the suspect, who is mentally ill, makes up stories and actually believes them himself, and also has a pathological desire to attract attention so that people start talking about him. The mental disorder was so strong that Topcheyev was ready to take responsibility for a crime punishable by death, just to get attention and fame. He was sent to a closed-type institution, and meanwhile the real criminal went hunting again. 18-year-old Yelena Nekrasova was planning to meet her cousin and go for a walk with the guy who had invited her on a date. The girl thought it wouldn't be modest to spend time alone with the young man, but she liked the suitor, so Yelena dressed up and took a beautiful lacquered purse with her. At her cousin's house, a young man overtook her and entered the building entrance. Yelena felt she shouldn't follow him. It would be better to slow down and wait a little. There are 2 elevators in the building entrance. Let him take one of them and then it will be safe to go in. A few minutes later, the girl entered the door, sure that the stranger was already gone, but he was standing in front of the elevator and, flashing his glasses, gave her a brief glance. The girl, without even knowing why, became very frightened. She wanted to turn around and run away, as if from mortal danger. But to shy away from an ordinary passerby would have been strange and impolite. And Elena, overcoming her fear, entered the elevator. But when the door slammed shut, the man lunged at her, his hands closing around her neck. But the girl had no intention of giving up without a fight.
Am I really going to die at 18 without experiencing anything in this life?
Yelena started hitting the criminal with her purse as hard as she could. He was taken aback and let go of her neck for a second. And it was at that moment that the elevator doors opened. The girl ran outside and started ringing all the apartment doors, but no one opened for her. In the middle of the day, most of the residents were at work.
I realized that I'm on the wrong floor and I start ringing all the apartment doors. And now I find myself here, right here.
At the end of the corridor, the girl realized that she had reached a dead end. A criminal silently came out from around the corner. He moved toward her slowly and calmly. When the man put his hand in his pocket, Elena thought he was about to pull out a knife and decided to fight to the end. Suddenly, one of the doors opened. Elena knocked down an old lady who peeked out at the noise, closed the door behind her and locked it. The outraged old lady exclaimed, "I'm going to call the police right now," and the girl nodded in agreement. "Yes, call them." The police arrived within a few minutes, but the criminal was already long gone. But at the scene of the crime, they found the first valuable clue. On the lacquered surface of the purse with which Yelena fought for her life, there was a fingerprint left by the attacker. But most importantly, the girl got a good look at the villain and remembered him well. Those terrible events were imprinted so clearly in her memory that since then, Nekrasova has never gone there again, into buildings that have an elevator.
I definitely don't go into buildings with elevators anymore, and I don't live in those buildings either.
Her testimony led to a composite sketch and description of the criminal. Age 20 to 25 years old, height about 180 centimeters, slim build, dark hair, thick eyebrows, straight nose, squints slightly, may wear glasses. And Elena also noticed that the attacker was wearing a good suit, tailored according to the latest fashion. Not every young man could afford such an impressive outfit. And yet, according to this description, thousands of city dwellers could fit the profile. The main thing the detectives realized was that they were not looking for a marginal madman, but rather a quite respectable person, someone with whom unfamiliar young women were not afraid to get into the elevator. People in Magnitogorsk began to fear letting their daughters leave the house. terrible rumors began to spread throughout the city, embellished with the most fantastic details. Detectives worked through all possible leads, reviewed old cases, and contacted operatives from other cities. Could the criminal be an out-of-town offender? A similar pattern is occasionally seen in people with such tendencies. For example, in Chelyabinsk there was a maniac known as the Dentist. He also committed crimes in elevators and took shoes from his victims. The man would follow the children he liked into the building, stop the elevator, corner the victim, and say that he was a dentist and was about to conduct an examination. He would take the children's shoes off in the doctor's office. You have to take your shoes off. And then he would take out pliers and pull out the victim's teeth. But the dentist didn't kill anyone. He only hurt them badly and caused psychological trauma. His crimes became an urban legend, and children in Chelyabinsk are still scared by them to this day. Don't get into the elevator with strangers or the dentist will attack you and pull out all your teeth with pliers. The villain dentist was caught fairly quickly. The man was not involved in any killings or assaults. He only pulled out teeth and scared children. The examination showed that this person was mentally ill and the court sent him for compulsory treatment. In Magnitogorsk, the search for the elevator operator continued. The city held its breath in fear, but the criminal didn't even think about stopping. A month later, a new crime occurred. At that time, pigeon breeding was a popular hobby, and there were many pigeon lofts in the city. One morning, Fedor Rodnov came to one of them to feed his favorite birds and give them water. As he was leaving the pigeon loft, the man stumbled over a strange bundle. Right by the path, there was something large wrapped in wrapping paper. The man looked inside and was stunned. It turned out to be a dead young woman. The detective swiftly identified the deceased as Tanzelia Usmanova, a student at the Pedagogical Institute. At first, the girl's access to oxygen was blocked by hands, and then the criminal tightened a rope around her neck. The body was left next to the house, wrapped in wrapping paper in such a way that from the outside it was unclear that a human body was lying by the path. This crime caused outrage in an already frightened city. Magnitogorsk residents wrote thousands of letters to the police, the prosecutor's office, and even to the very top in Moscow. The townspeople demanded that their children be protected from the murderer and asked one question: why is the criminal still at large?
I saw with my own eyes the pain of the people, the pain, the tragedy in families, and the intensity of that civic hatred.
But the villain went hunting again. This time he chose the experimental building, which people called the sailboat. This building was constructed for the workers of Transmash and is distinguished by its long maze-like corridors and excellent sound insulation. The young beauty, Lyuda Pozdenyakova, left the house for 5 minutes. Her mother sent her to the bakery to buy something tasty for tea, but the girl didn't return for a long time, and her family began to suspect something was wrong. Her older sister went out to look for Lyuda, but she also didn't return for a long time. Half an hour later, her older daughter was brought back arm in arm to the worried mother. A pale, tearful girl entered the house together with a police officer and an ambulance doctor and could only say, "Mom, we don't have Lyuda anymore." Poznyakova was deprived of her life just 2 steps away from her apartment. She died of asphyxiation. No one saw or heard anything. Good sound insulation of a well-built house became a great help for the criminal. The signs of struggle began in the elevator. The man entered it together with Lyuda, started harassing her, squeezed her neck, and then threw her body in the stairwell. The investigators examined every inch. No substantial evidence. The detectives felt complete despair and helplessness.
And here, for the first time in my life, perhaps, tears welled up from my own helplessness.
Panic swept over the city. Magnitogorsk residents began to gather at spontaneous rallies, and women were afraid to enter apartment buildings and use elevators. Near the Ural Dumplings restaurant, passers-by beat up a guy who just wanted to meet a girl, but he was mistaken for a maniac.
My neighbor in the building, we used to be friends. Our children were the same age. She even carried a hammer in her bag.
At the metallurgical plant, they started collecting signatures for a letter demanding the removal of the head of the Department of Internal Affairs from his position. What was happening in Magnitogorsk caught attention in Moscow. They began to demand reports from the detectives to the very top, and a temporary committee to combat crime was created, which was subordinate only to the city party committee. Meanwhile, the whole city united in the desire to catch the murderer. The plant sent 1,000 volunteers to assist the police. The townspeople began to form patrol groups that kept watch in building entrances and patrolled the streets, escorted women home, and questioned suspicious individuals. The local printing house, on its own initiative, printed and distributed thousands of flyers with a composite sketch and description of the criminal. The announcement about the search for the murderer was placed on the front page of the local newspaper. The police received up to 200 calls a day, a record. Every call was taken seriously, and a patrol was dispatched immediately. They worked around the clock and achieved unprecedented results. During that period, street crime in the city almost completely disappeared. The investigators began to fear that Dushegub, noticing all the commotion, would decide to lay low. But his urge for crime turned out to be stronger, and the villain, for whom the entire Magnitogorsk was searching, soon got back to his old ways. On November 25, 1989, Lyubov Zykina entered the entrance of her apartment building. There were patrol volunteers on duty nearby, but the men were careless about their task. They were chatting and laughing, and didn't even notice that an inconspicuous and decently dressed young man followed the girl into the entrance. This time, the criminal made a mistake in choosing his victim. The young girl only looked small and fragile on the outside. Zykina had been seriously involved in sports since early childhood and was able to put up a strong fight against her attacker even though he was much bigger. The girl knocked off the man's glasses and fur hat, and the villain ran away. The entire police force was immediately put on alert. An order was given to stop all vehicles and search all men. The task force entered one of the trams. "Comrades, this is a check. Please be understanding and remain calm. The tram will continue on its way shortly." The excited passengers watched the people in uniform with curiosity, hoping to understand what had happened. And only one young man seemed strange. Amidst this commotion, he behaved demonstratively, calmly, and tried not to pay attention to the police. Most importantly, the passenger had no hat on. By the end of November in the Urals, it's already 20 degrees below zero, and an ordinary passerby wouldn't walk around dressed like that. The suspicious guy was brought to the station, and there Lyubov Zykina confidently identified him as the attacker. At first, the officers thought that the girl had made a mistake. The detainee turned out to be Dmitry Gridin, a student at the Mining Institute, a Komsomol member, and an excellent student from a respected family. The young man gave the impression of being a quiet, intelligent bookworm, but during the search, a knife was found in his pocket, and the examination showed that it was with this knife that the criminal attacked the girls. Soon the young man started talking and described the crimes in detail, details that even the investigators did not know at that time. For example, he remembered how, during the attack on Lyuda Poznyakova, a ginger cat crossed his path. And indeed, on that floor there was exactly such a kitten as he described, and the owners let the animal out for a walk every day. The detectives were puzzled. Dmitry Gridin was only 21 years old. His father was the head of a workshop at the famous Magnitogorsk Iron and Steel Works plant. A happy, well-off childhood and a good education. The young man married a beautiful and young classmate, and they had a daughter. At the time of Gridin's arrest, she was 6 months old. From the outside, the marriage looked happy, and the young man was considered quiet, calm, and unremarkable. After studying, he worked part-time as a kindergarten security guard. During the inspection of his workplace, one of the investigators noticed a strange detail. Someone had cut the rope from a child's sled. Then a new one was tied in its place, but the ends of the old rope were still hanging along the edges. The sled was sent for examination. Experts confirmed that it was this very rope that had been tightened around the neck of the Pedagogical Institute student Tanzilia Zimanova. It turned out that Dmitry was unhappy in his family life. His wife, exhausted by a difficult pregnancy and childbirth, and then by caring for a newborn baby, began to refuse her husband intimacy. The man began to feel a sense of inadequacy and soon found a way to solve this problem. According to Gridin's testimony, one day he accidentally pressed up against an attractive girl in the elevator, and at that moment he realized exactly what he had been missing. And soon the guy began committing a crime. He had no intention of abusing the victim. The villain felt satisfaction from strangulation. He liked to watch the agony of a girl he found attractive. The investigation established Gridin's involvement in 6 attacks, 3 of which ended with the deaths of the girls. His loving parents found Dmitry a good lawyer from Chelyabinsk. In Magnitogorsk, not a single attorney agreed to defend him. After speaking with the lawyer, Gridin changed his position, began to withdraw all his previous statements, and insisted on his innocence. Now the guy presented a rather coherent version.
He was outside for a long time, then went into the entrance to warm up. Then a girl came in after him. Well, it was kind of awkward to just stand there in the entrance. He pretended to be going somewhere, as if taking the elevator with her.
Gridin claims that his glasses fogged up from the warmth, so he started wiping them and accidentally bumped into the girl, but she thought the guy was trying to attack her.
A scream and commotion ensued. Initially, I was confused about the situation, then my glasses fell off. She's sitting on the floor, pushing me away with her feet. I'm confused.
According to Dmitry, he got confused and ran outside, leaving his hat and glasses behind. And then he realized that the girl mistook him for the maniac the whole city is looking for. The guy got scared that he would be arrested and wouldn't be able to prove anything. He tried to run away, but he was detained. A real storm broke out in the city. People were demanding not just justice, but retribution. At the trial, people brought a big banner that said, "Comrades judges, the people have delivered their verdict. Now it's your turn."
Vigilant justice, vigilant justice, vigilant justice.
People demanded an open trial and a public execution. A group of citizens published an open letter on behalf of the entire city's population. "We demand the strictest punishment of the death sentence for this demon, born from the womb of humanity." A terrible incident occurred during the court session. The mother of one of the murdered girls attacked the defendant's wife and tried to suffocate her with her own hair. The wife supported Gridin and in court insulted the victims and expressed doubts about their mental abilities. He himself behaved provocatively at the hearings, smiled, and was constantly writing something down. And the relatives of the accused were seated in the center of the hall, surrounded by police officers. For protection from the outraged victims, Gridin was brought in and taken out of the hearing secretly through the back entrance, so that the angry townspeople wouldn't tear the accused apart. It must be admitted that there was a lot of pressure on the court. Society would not have accepted any verdict except the death penalty. And the death sentence was pronounced, the city calmed down. But by that time, Gridin's parents had started writing a petition for clemency, and after a few years, the request was granted. The death penalty was replaced with life imprisonment. This news shocked everyone, but the outrage of the townspeople could not influence the verdict. In the year 2000, the convicted person filed a complaint with the United Nations Human Rights Committee, and it turned out that the material evidence of his guilt had somehow disappeared. A purse with fingerprints, the knife that wounded Iru Sorokina, the rope used to cut off Tanzela's oxygen, dozens of volumes of identification. No one expected that they would ever be needed again. There was a lot of emotion and tension during the trial, and this worked in Gridin's favor. He claims that there is no evidence against him. The United Nations Committee saw violations in the investigation and the trial. The scandalous situation compromised the case and gave the released person a chance for freedom.
The United Nations Human Rights Committee considered my complaint and decided that Russia must overturn the sentence against me due to its illegality.
But the Russian Federation is not obliged to comply with the decision of this committee, and they refused to overturn the sentence, justifying this by saying that after the arrest of Gridin, the attacks on the girls stopped. The criminal went out hunting often and regularly, and neither the patrols at the entrances nor the commotion stopped him. Only the arrest of Grydin put an end to the series of attacks. The convicted man was sent to the correctional colony, 5 colony in the Vologda region, which was called the Vologda Peyatak. There, the most dangerous criminals in Russia sentenced to life imprisonment are held. Grydin is considered there to be the last Soviet maniac. His wife, who initially supported Dmitry, soon divorced him and married someone else. The convicted man says that he doesn't blame her and doesn't keep in touch with his former family. Why would I? Neither I need it, nor does she, nor does her new husband. After 25 years of imprisonment, in 2014, Grydin became eligible for parole and he took advantage of it. He claimed that the case was fabricated, there was no evidence. The testimony was obtained by force, but the court issued a decision of refusal. In the summer of 2017, Grydin again applied for parole, but the district court refused him once more. He filed an appeal with the regional court, but he didn't achieve anything there either. At the end of 2020, 52-year-old Dmitry Grydin tried for the 3rd time to get released on parole. In his petition, he referred to the fact that he had served 31 years without serious violations and allegedly confessed to the murders under pressure. He later retracted his statement. He also added that if he were released, he would have a place to live, as his parents were ready to take him in. But the Belozersky District Court found out that during his years in the colony, Grydin violated the rules 24 times. As a result, on February 25th, 2021, the court again denied him parole. To get parole, you have to admit your guilt and to repent, but Grydin refuses and continues to insist on his innocence. He has the right to apply for release every 3 years, and the convict intends to use this right until he gets what he wants. From time to time, frightening rumors circulate around Magnitogorsk that someone has seen Grydin in the city again. People are still afraid to enter apartment buildings, and elevator operators anxiously watch the faces of passengers on public transport. Even decades later, the Magnitogorsk elevator operator still manages to keep the city in fear. And what do you think about this story? Comment, like or dislike, click the bell and subscribe to the Strashnoti Telegram channel, link below. Also, check out other videos on the channel. They come out, although you don't always get notifications about it.